Welcome to Breakthrough Minds with Raj Mahapatra. I'm Raj, and I get to sit in the room where cutting-edge technology is being built. And the conversations I'm part of are just too good not to share. That's what this podcast is all about. Emre, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited. I'm going to say this on every conversation. I know I'm going to say this every conversation because the reason why I've got people coming in to talk to me is because we have these amazing conversations. What I'd like you to do, just to start the whole conversation off, rather than me introducing you,
Sure.
why don't you introduce yourself to me? Who are you and what do you do?
Awesome. No, first and foremost, thank you so much for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to speak to you on camera. I know we have all these conversations on the side. So yeah, I'm Emre Kazim. I'm co-founder of Holistic AI. So we founded the company, me and my co-founder, Adriano Koshiyama, while we were academics at UCL. Mm-hmm. So Adriano was just wrapping up his PhD and I was doing a postdoc. And we were really interested in the space of trustworthy AI. Yeah. And we were trying to think, okay, at UCL, DeepMind spun out, which was this huge implication for the whole world of AI. Yeah. And there was this kind of consciousness that we gave birth to these children, if you will. We should probably be involved in disciplining them.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. Discipline, I like that
Well,
word.
It was this idea. So I think there was a really interesting use case because we were in the financial computing group. Mm-hmm. And the principal investigator was a guy called Professor Philip Trevelyan.
Okay.
And Philip was looking at algorithmic trading systems. And there was this trading system that glitched. It was Knight Capital. Yeah. And it wiped out 440 million.
I remember.
So it wasn't even so much, nowadays people talk about trust in algorithms in terms of like bias and explainability and so on. Really, it was about you're using this kind of super mission critical system. How can you be confident that these systems are actually going to perform or act in a way that you can predict or that you can be confident in? So we were doing this kind of research. Adriano finishes his PhD. He says, Emre, do you want to start a company? And I said, I've been waiting my whole life for you to say this. And then we just spun the company out. And what we do is we're a platform provider for AI governance. Yeah. So using AI across the business, single source of truth, end-to-end, purpose-built AI platform that does your risk assessment, your monitoring, and so on and so forth.
Now, one of the things that we briefly talked about before we turned the cameras on was your aborted PhD.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Which was in carbon nanotubes.
Yes.
Which is great. But it gives you, but when you say carbon nanotubes and you do a PhD, you get a real sense of who Emre is. But it's not really the case, is it? Because what did you actually do your PhD in?
So I did my undergraduate at UCL in chemistry. And actually, one of the reasons why I went to UCL to do my undergraduate is I had this real appetite to study abroad. Okay. And there was a placement where you could go to North America for a year in your third year. Okay. So I did, and I went to Toronto. I was at University of Toronto. Yeah. And while I was at Toronto, I did an elective. The North American system is quite different to our system here. And it was in philosophy. And funny enough, there was a guy who was telling me, Emre, everyone's getting like 80, 90% in this course. I thought it was just the way because I'm studying abroad and so on.
Be a nice easy course to do.
Yeah, but it was just, and I had to buy this anthology of like historical texts. Mm-hmm. And then I read this piece by, I read the Apology. Okay. And it was just like, what is this? So I ended up just really becoming passionate about philosophy. Mm-hmm. But I continued with my studies, finished my master's at UCL, and I started a PhD at Cambridge. Yeah. And we were working on carbon nanotubes. So I finished my first year.
Because it made sense.
Well, it was just, and Raj, just go, throws it back to, I throw it back to you. There's so many people now, and this is something that I find in the whole startup ecosystem, the tech ecosystem, which is you've got choices. Yeah. And it's, and they come with genuine risks because it made sense to continue with that PhD and then get a doctorate in that and just carry on with life. But I was just thinking, what? My real passion is philosophy. Mm-hmm. I'm just going through the motions. Do you know what? To hell with it. I'm in my early 20s. I'm gonna leave my PhD. I moved back into my parents' house and I did a self-funded master's in philosophy. And then I finished my master's and there was a supervisor there, a lecturer in German philosophy. And he said, you should really do a PhD. And I thought, well, out of the frying pan, And then I ended up doing my PhD in Kant and his ethical philosophy.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because my first question that I'm going to I've written down. I'm going to actually look. I'm really proud of myself. So I spent time crafting this question for you.
I feel so special.
So I've written down. You've moved from deeply philosophical work on Kantian conscience and moral self-awareness into the fast-moving real world of AI governance. In an era where policy is running to catch up with innovation, what do you think academics bring to the table?
So it's very interesting that in this particular era, because it depends on which academics you're referring to. So for example, are we talking about people doing foundational research in AI? And what we found in that space is it's been extraordinary, because all of these kind of LLM companies, all of these things have really exploded with people who were from the academy.
Yeah.
So when we noticed that Demis and Hinton won their Nobel Prizes last year, and they were heavily associated with the Gatsby Institute at UCL, it was a kind of moment where I remember speaking to some of our colleagues and thinking, wow, it's our team, if you will, and it's people with PhDs and so on. So in terms of the actual AI itself, in terms of the innovation, it very much came from the academy. In terms of commercialization and so on and so forth, obviously there's other players involved, but really these were university startups. And we were a university startup. On the other side of it, in terms of what was taking place in policy and law, is, and I would love your opinion on this as well. I mean, the cut and thrust of practical law, or people working in industry, is very different to people maybe in academic philosophy or academic law or policy, which is taking a step back and saying, what's coming? And there was a lot of that activity while I was at UCL as a postdoc. So the role was probably more speculative. It was just kind of ask questions and just kind of ideate and see if there was some interdisciplinary way of approaching this coming wave, if you will, in AI impact. So I think the role of the academy in the AI space was very much innovation. It was pioneering these things. And in terms of the other disciplines in the academy, it was more kind of theoretical and forward-looking rather than at that time, day-to-day, unlike it is now. What's the implications of these things?
This is fascinating for me because I think about my time at university, doing law at university, and studying case law from the 1920s that has a real impact today. So, an evolution of tort law, and then massive push on governance in the United States in the late 20s, early 30s. And it all came around because of the Industrial Revolution and this rapid changes going on. And I remember thinking to myself, in the early 90s, we'll never see a time like this again. I'm studying this law, we'll never see this again. And then the internet came around. It was like, oh my God, it's going to happen. And then the same rules apply, but just differently. And now I think we're having a real moment where we have to start challenging some of our preconceptions as to what is actually happening. And do we need new law? Do we need new processes? And it goes back to that idea that you've got within law firms, within businesses, people who are practically applying what exists. And there's a rise you're now seeing of the kind of the specialists in jurisprudence, the ethical philosophers coming to the forefront of the conversation. And I think that there's a risk of focusing on compliance, overshadowing the need to actually do these wider considerations, which I think sits kind of neatly in academia. However, you need to get those academics out of that space,
absolutely,
and into the kind of the mainstream conversation. I mean, that's how I see it.
I completely agree. One of the things what's really interesting is we saw a explosion of legal interest with the EU AI Act. And interest in terms of, hey, we had a great success story with GDPR. We're going to I think the European intent was to then replicate that in the space of AI with the AI Act. And the same way in which the GDPR became the global de facto privacy legislation, if you will.
The Brussels effect, rolling out across the world.
It was supposed to happen for the AI Act. And I think what we saw in the UK was a much more pragmatic approach, which is our kind of philosophy, right? Which is to say, hang on a minute, we have all this anti-discrimination law, right? We have disclosure requirements. We have accountability mechanisms. We have a lot of things that already exist that can be used to, if you will, hold AI accountable.
Yeah.
And that in the United States, what we found was actually a significant amount of activity that was driven in a slightly different way to what we were seeing in Europe. So what I noticed was both in the academy and in terms of the practice of law, the people who were pioneering and motivating the conversation on this side of the Atlantic were people who came from data privacy.
Yeah.
And what happened, I remember going over to the States. I was at a conference in Virginia. And I looked around and I realized at the time, and this is maybe 22 or 23, and it was lots and lots of people from cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And that kind of path dependency really has an impact on how you think we should approach AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, one is motivated very much by kind of consumer protection, rights.
Well, it's really interesting that, you know, when you talk about at the Paris conference and Paris Summit earlier this year, it was all about AI risk. And you know, the week before, the UK government announced its paper, which was opportunities in AI.
Yes.
So there's opportunities versus risk.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're coming to, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really about what do we think AI is? So I think the part where I think maybe the European approach
It's a big question.
Well, the data protection was very, very. It made sense that it was rights based.
Yeah,
right? It made sense that you would kind of create all these kind of mechanisms, whereas it looked like, and it doesn't seem to come at a dramatic cost to innovation to say we should protect people's privacy. You know, whereas this idea that you know, are we putting certain guardrails, or are we curtailing AI to an extent where it kind of it prohibits particular kinds of innovation and so on and so forth? So, like, one of the counter arguments I constantly hear about the AI Act or the European approach is, okay, do you know what? A large company can just pay a law firm lots and lots of money, and they'll be compliant. Yeah. Whereas, you know, how are you going to burden an SME or a small startup with all of these kind of requirements?
One of the questions I was going to save till at the end of the interview, I'm going to be doing this with every person I'm talking to on the podcast, is I'm going to ask them at the very end, what does it mean in this world of AI, where we are rapidly seeing the evolution of AI and the replacement of main tracks of work with AI systems instead? What does it mean to be human? And I know this is something that comes into your research, your academic research as well. But I think it really fits into this conversation, because when you talk about GDPR and rights, and then you talk about what does it mean to be human, is there something that's missing in this whole conversation when it comes to regulators? And this is now jumping right ahead to one of my questions here, which was, you know, regulators are trying to grapple with the challenges of AI. Do you think there's a risk that compliance-focused mindset actually overshadows the pursuit of ethical AI practices?
Without a shadow of a doubt. What I'm really concerned about is, are we going to create a compliance market, but we're not actually going to solve the problem of governance?
Exactly.
And I noticed, and I in a way, kind of, if it's so prescriptive, and then I noticed that, you know, when you get into a room and people start talking about, oh, we've got Article 22 of GDPR, so we should be able to do our transparency obligations against that, and the frameworks have been provided. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but what does it actually mean to be transparent or explainable in an algorithmic system? Yeah. And it is much more to do with the way in which we interact with these systems, the way in which what does it mean to have agency? What does it mean to be convinced that the thing that you're interacting with is a natural object or an artificial object, and so on and so forth. So I have zero doubt, and I hope that what we don't end up with is tick box exercise. Yeah. So enterprises or companies,
which is why GDPR works so well. Yeah. Because yes, it was kind of a tick box, but it was tick box based on principle, and to comply with a principle is a much, you know. You can't. I remember having conversations in the 90s with clients here, and they were saying, how do we get around this? Yeah. It's like, no, the point is you can't get around it. It's a principle.
But do you care about privacy, right? Like in AI, do you care about autonomy? Yeah. Like, do you care about how it impacts? So for example, let's say one of the areas that lots of people have issues with are to do with demographic disparity. Yeah. The impact on different groups of these systems in, let's say, credit scoring or recruitment and so on and so forth. And the thing is, what I think you can have a legislative force or compliance requirement to say, you need to make sure that your systems are, in quotes, fair or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. But there's going to be a significant amount of innovation in that space to say, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
So it could go down a compliance route where we might just kind of they may just become best practice to just meet a particular set of statistical standards.
Yeah.
And then there's just way more than that, to do with how is it interacting with somebody. How does that impact in terms of the UI and UX experience across different demographics and so on and so forth? What is the long-term cognitive impact of interacting with these kinds of systems for particular demographics and so on and so forth? So I think, and it's a real question for me because in a way, let's defend compliance insofar as a company can't really be attacked, if you will, to say, but we were compliant. And then let's say they go about and they innovate and they try something above and beyond, then it does open up the space for, oh no, this wasn't right, or this wasn't a good approach. It doesn't give them a kind of public standard to just go to cite against.
Yeah.
So there are market forces that kind of drive, if you will, it being only a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
But then I would argue, and I think this is way more important, which is I don't think you can meaningfully get the value of AI without appropriate governance, because governance is not, in our view, a negative thing.
Yeah, I think about this, and I think about 25 years ago, living and working in New York, and GDPR, and we had the whole conversation about how the US approaches GDPR, data protection generally, and I remember trying to have a conversation with some American lawyers about this, and the conversation was, they were saying, but companies need to be able to do these things with the data. And I was saying, okay, let's if you want to understand the EU position, you need to understand the EU and why the European Union exists. And the European Union came out of the Second World War.
Totally.
What was the Second World War? What happened during the Second World War? And there was fighting. No. People were persecuted for their personal beliefs. So when you want to see why PII, personally identifiable information, is so critical, and the protection that is so critical, you have to understand that's the starting point. And I think I worry we're missing that conversation here.
So I remember I wrote an article, an academic article, which I was surprised people read, and it was on, and I put it in there, which was I kind of postulated that you would struggle to provide a first principles, metaphysical, if you will, defense of privacy.
Okay.
Right? Like it's way more, the only way to understand our view on privacy or European fetish of privacy is through historical context.
Yeah.
Like outside of the structure of a modern state, it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Like it becomes more acute the more our surveillance technologies, if you call them surveillance technologies, become more and more efficacious.
Yeah.
The more we interact. Now, because it was, I think in the GDPR referred to as a fundamental right, people respond, no, it's a fundamental right. And they were just kind of intuitively or involuntarily almost just asserting it.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, let's be careful. When you say something is a right, like a fundamental right, that's a lot of metaphysical baggage that So for example, that we are equal. Do you know what? I think we could probably provide first principle defense of that. And what we were finding is that, and this actually comes into this discussion about, rather than discussing fundamental rights and getting into first principles philosophy, sometimes we can say that we hold, for particular reasons, historical reasons, a set of values.
Yeah.
One of those values is, do you know what? In the modern state, given the level of the ability of private enterprises and state to know what an individual is doing or looking at or whatever it is, scrolling, how long their eyes were set on a particular image.
Yeah.
Even to the extent of like typing in a tweet and then deleting it, even to the extent where that is being recorded. They probably have a better understanding or memory of what you've done than you would have yourself. And then you've got other things to do with justice, equality, and so on. And it could be that we're looking at these systems and saying, okay, hang on a minute. Or even human flourishing and saying, okay, we have these different values that we hold for particular reasons. Some are to do with first principles philosophy, some are to do with just purely historical reasons. And how do we negotiate these different values and probably trade them off as a society? And that's just a kind of robust ethical debate, democratic debate.
And it's interesting. So I mean, and I love when we bring into the conversation ethics, because ethics, we talk about ethics like there's a global norm.
Yeah.
And it really isn't true.
No.
And the thing I've learned, and you'll know too, is just from, just by traveling from one area to another. And it can be from one town to another.
Totally.
Forget about one country to another, or one part of the world to another part of the world.
Totally.
Ethics, morals, and we can't sit there and say you're wrong, because they are sitting there saying, but they're wrong.
Yeah.
And what we need to do here, and one of my worries about AI is that we're creating a monster but maybe monster is a strong word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We're creating
like a Leviathan
a very large something that's sitting there that we are going to imbue with various morals and ethics. And whose morals and ethics are they going to be?
Yeah.
How do we oversee that? What do we need to oversee that?
Yeah.
And this is back to governance, but when you come back governance, you're talking about jurisdictional governance.
Yeah.
And every country, every state has got a different idea of what they need.
Yeah.
So there's a technological innovation side.
Absolutely.
And there's human protection. Is that the right word to use here?
Do you know, right, it's really interesting because if you look at the first wave of when Google released Bard, and then there was all this controversy that it was woke. That it was saying, produce an image of some of the founding fathers from, the US, and then it was producing people of color and so on and so forth. And clearly what had happened, I think, was that Google was saying, look, what we really don't want to do is create a system that gets used in an abusive fashion. That just produces vile images, racist text and so on. And they probably skewed the system to such an extent that actually ended up with a few systems that were a little bit kind of absurd. Where it was just showing demographics in totally different contexts and so on for historical reasons. So it wasn't tracking, if you will, it wasn't tracking truth necessarily, but it was saying we need to, and that's a controversial claim in itself, but it was saying that, the framework, the broad use of this should be done in such and such a way. Now, what is interesting for me is that I don't know if the state has any role in this. So, and I mean that not insofar as should it or shouldn't. I think these companies are engineering these systems through kind of human reinforcement learning and so on. So you see, for example, that if you try to interact with one of these kind of mainstream LLM systems, that it won't let you use repugnant language, or it won't produce particular types of language, or it will skew in a particular way. Now, they're generally liberal values represented in probably the West Coast of America. That generally, that's probably where
there's a real risk in there, isn't there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if there was somebody was asking the question. I was with a group of people from ESG, and they were talking about what if you asked an LLM or one of these models about what's the best way to deal with the climate situation, and it produced a result such that it said, do you know what, reduction in carbon is actually going to be a terrible thing because the use of carbon is motivating civilization and so on and so forth. So it gave an answer which you just found to be absolutely unacceptable. What would you respond to that? And I thought it was such a strange way of putting the point. It was to say, if there is a difference of opinion, should you censor it? And I thought, well, there's a step back, and it's more to do with, is there a general bias in the distribution of answers towards one worldview over another? And the thing is, we might think, well, in some circumstances, yes. In other circumstances, no. So if we were doing scientific research, or if we were doing a kind of literature review, we'd really want to have robust, balanced view of things. But as a society, Raj, do we want systems that are interacting, that children are using, general places are using, that don't have any, in quotes, let's say, kind of constraints? The answer to that is probably no.
Yeah.
So it is so it's not to say we shouldn't, if you will, take a moral view, but I certainly take the point, which is, are we just going to entrench a very specific group of peoples, if you will, worldview, and then universalize that?
Yeah. And what's interesting is I am, as you're talking, I'm thinking about another question I was going to ask you about, which is this whole idea of this, the methodical or methodological patience that comes with having to be an academic philosopher.
Yeah.
And then you've got this operational imperative now to get air policy in place.
Yes.
And technology is not waiting for any of this.
No.
And, how do you reconcile these conversations? Because we're talking about, when you talk about the kind of the philosophy side of this, these are conversations which aren't going to be resolved in 6 months, 12 months, 12 years.
Totally.
And yet technology is
completely,
in the last year, last 2 years, forget about it.
I know, it's like almost every month some groundbreaking innovation is occurring. So I think the point, and this will, and I'm very comfortable saying this, is I'm hostile to, in quotes, ethicists.
Okay, hostile to ethicists.
I just find the idea so repugnant. That somehow, because one has studied I've studied the history of ideas.
Okay.
Right? And in your own home, in your own families, does that somehow make that gives you a particular perspective where you can bring to the conversation.
Got it.
But it doesn't give you moral authority.
Yeah, and when you say ethicist, you're talking about someone who's tried to exercise a moral authority over someone else. Got it. Okay.
So I meant it in that respect. Yeah. So I divided.
Someone who's studied ethics is not the problem. It's someone who's trying to impose ethics.
So I think of it in two ways. Yeah. When I studied philosophy, when I studied ethics, I was interested in it for me.
Yeah,
I was actually interested in it, intellectual curiosity. I was like, what are the history of ideas? That's why I absolutely adore studying religious philosophy, traditions other than traditions that we come from, the history of ideas, and so on and so forth. And then that's something to do with me.
Yeah.
Right. But then we've got a much bigger conversation about what on earth should we do with these things? Yeah. And like you said, it's both time constrained, but it's also democratic. So I have a voice in that context, which is at that point, at the point at which we become public agents, if you will, then it becomes democratic. Then it really is about, as a group, as a society, how should we approach this?
Yeah, I worry about the word democratic within that, because when you say democratic, I think what you mean is collegiate.
So I mean, so let's take an example, Raj, and say, let's say the EU AI Act, right? Or is it that we have to convene a set of philosophers and lawyers to say what we should or shouldn't do? Rather, that is an instantiation, if you will. The law in its Platonic form should be a kind of expression of a value or concept that we can broadly say as a society that we believe in, and that there is enough buy-in to justify codification.
Yeah, and it's
Does that make sense?
No, it makes complete sense. I think that I grew up with various religions involved in my life. My mother was Sikh, my father was Hindu. I grew up going to a Church of England school.
Oh, nice.
Religion,
so did I, by the way.
Religion, I get it. Really important. Don't ask me to believe in one of them, but I get it.
Sure.
Really important. But what I really understood in religion was that religion provided, over time, there was an evolution of societal norms that got codified depending on where you were into religion. And it was less about a God, more about there is something else that you invent the concept of God, and crikey, I'm being risky here, aren't I? On a podcast. I know, but the idea. This is my personal view. You take it, you look at the rules that each religion lay out, and it's about about how you live safely as a society, and the community, and things like don't eat pork as an unclean animal.
Sure.
Actually, if it's a hot country, it's an unclean animal because it goes off really quickly. So it's less about it being unclean. It's more about it's just not safe. And every religion has got those kind of little nuances to it. Now, when you talk about laws is, as you correctly put it, it's this idea that you've got some level of, we have a understanding in order to make society operate successfully, you need certain rules. And as long as everyone abides by the rules, you don't need law. But actually the risk is there are outliers that you need to then bring in laws in play so that you can actually say, now we've got...
This goes back exactly to the point that you made earlier, and where you were kind of pushing back and saying, what I understood was to say, oh, Emre, I hope it doesn't become a compliance thing. I hope it's something way beyond that. And that is exactly what we're looking at in AI, which is to say, let's take a step back, the developers, the users of these systems, and say, look at the impact they're having on society. Like, do you really want to kind of liberate yourself from the ethical import of what you're doing by saying, but we're compliant? Say, well, just stop for a second and say, hang on. Like, does this thing make sense? Does it make sense to use this system in this way? Does it make sense to develop these systems in these kind of ways? So like we've got, and I think it's been the question that's been haunting everybody, which is about the future of labor. And, the future of the workplace. I'm sure, and it'd be interested to hear your experience in the law firm itself, where you've got juniors coming in and you've got these technologies that could probably do what these juniors are doing. But what the juniors do is integral for them becoming senior lawyers or disciplined lawyers, or have the knowledge base for what they're going to do later on in their career. And I think about that question. I think yesterday I was speaking with a friend of mine, and she was saying how she has 5 children and all of them are very well educated, and none of them has started a proper career. And she says, and she was part of that cohort who you joined the company and you did it for 30 years. And she said, I'm just anxious about what my children are going to do. And I thought for myself, my God, it's true.
And how old are children?
Her children were in their 20s.
Okay, wow.
All in their 20s. And and I thought, that's true. Look at how wild the labor market is. It's almost like people are not just getting it, like, because of how destructive technology is and how whole different ecosystems are emerging. Perhaps whole areas of labor are becoming irrelevant because they'll be automated. And you think, well, a young person who's starting off in a career has got to almost become, it's not so much about, let me get into a company and build myself in there, but it's more like, there's just all this opportunity to move. There could be a redundancy in the nature of the work that they're doing. So these are huge social questions.
Next week, I've been invited to a high school, and they've asked me to come in and talk about the future of work.
Wow.
And, I'm going to go to talk to a whole bunch of 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And I honestly don't know how to say it, which doesn't come across really scary. Because actually...
it's unclear.
It's
not become a lawyer, become an engineer, become a doctor.
But actually, I think that, what we are having to do is train people to have certain analytical skills that are transferable. And the transferability of those things is what can stand people, to good stead right now.
I really, sometimes I'm a miss when it comes to this. Because I know on the one side, everything about me, a lot of my intuitions have always been take risk. Find opportunities. The other day, from my aborted PhD, a good friend of mine, Matt, he came over to see me at the office, and he said, Emre, I finished my PhD. I got a job. I got a house. I managed to pay off most of my house. Things are fine. But I got the hint, and I don't think he would mind me saying this, but I got the hint that he was a bit like, should I have been a bit more wild? Should I have done a few? And I was like, and I'm sitting there on the other side saying,
I haven't got a house.
And then I was just like, So part of me is just, I have these kind of contradictory impulses. Of, now I think maybe as time is progressing as well, I'm becoming more conservative insofar as it's not so much grab a bag and move country.
There's definitely something about being on the bleeding edge or trying to be at the very forefront of what's going on,
Yeah.
which there's an inherent risk with.
Of course, yeah.
And I've spent 23 years, the last 23 years of my life, working as in-house counsel for various different startups.
Wow.
And it's been an amazing journey. But unlike some of my peers who have now owned their house outright and everything else, let's not talk about that.
Question then, what will you say to those children?
It's such an interesting question, because what I want them to understand is that universally, there are going to be some skills you need. And those skills are going to be the same skills we've been trying to teach people for the last 20 years since the advent of the internet, which is, can you look at something and know whether it's right or not? Whether does it feel right? The other thing which I think that I don't see, I think that the people skills that right now, right in this moment in time in schools, people are really struggling with. And, a lot of it comes down to COVID and the isolation of technology, but the timing really sucks because actually right now, people skills are what mark out people from the computers. I talk about the fact that, what an AI can't do is I can't put an AI in a room with a whole bunch of people and say, read the room. Whereas a person can be trained to do that.
Oh, totally. I was looking at there's this whole impulse to do sales via AI. To say, hey, what is a sale? You have somebody has a problem, you identify it, you target them with messaging. And I thought, well, yes, if you've got if you've got a particular kind of buyer and if you've got a particular kind of product. But when you're doing something like, if you're a law firm going to compete against another law firm in selling a particular kind of service, then it's all about reading the room. It's all about context. It's all about the relationship. And so
you
on.
talked a bit about, junior lawyers coming in and what do they get to do now going forward? I mean, it's interesting for me because I think that, lawyers, if you think that lawyers draft documents, then that's the end of lawyers. But actually I am very strong on my beliefs about what lawyers do, and lawyers do not, drafting a document is the smallest part of what we do.
Totally. They calculate risk, right? They calculate risk and they make judgments all the time, like trade-offs and so on and so forth. I was thinking about, and it begs the question actually about the capabilities of AI going forward. And I was sitting and I read this article published by Microsoft. It was an academic article. It was about shifting work patterns as a result of Gen AI. And what was interesting for me, and this goes back to right just before we started the podcast, when you made a comment about the adoption curve and the timescales. I'd love to kind of explore that a little bit. And what I found was they did a 6-month randomized study of Copilot licenses that they had given out to enterprise. And what they found was, and obviously they have to motivate saying, everybody is, but when you actually dug into the study, I think the number was, it was 40% were using it once a week. And then when you actually looked at people who were actively using it, it was about 2% across the board. And the thing is, when I read that, I was quite struck because I thought, and then I looked at and they said, what was it being used for? And they said the first thing it was being used, the thing it was used highly for was for drafting emails. Makes sense to respond to an email. And like video or call summaries. That makes sense. And then what they found was there wasn't a dramatic increase in productivity, which kind of makes sense, right? If I give every single person 2 more hours a week, it wouldn't dramatically change productivity. And then it made me think, and I thought, well, it just takes time for these technologies to be adopted. And it also depends on the paradigm of AI that we think is going to ultimately impact the labor market. So I think we've got basically about 2 or 3 models. I think the Copilot model is all of us are just going to do the same work, but we're going to have but it's going to be supercharged. And they're going to be able to do things much more efficiently, much more intelligently because we've got this Copilot. Second model, and that's the kind of democratic model, right? Which is just everyone's going to be supercharged.
And do you think that's the best case scenario?
I don't. So the other model is more the kind of vanguard It looks like the agentic systems are
Yeah.
kind of representing this kind of model, which is the AI is going to just do the work.
Yeah.
And then what's going to happen is actually you're going to have a company which is just, and you see people like, I was watching a video by Benioff yesterday, and he was echoing a lot of stuff that Jensen was saying. And it was just about how, you know what, we're going to have he was talking about 50% productivity savings, which basically means cutting staff. Year on year for the next, 3-4 years. And it's just the overseer is going to, you have, instead of human capital, you have AI capital, and you're going to be overseeing that. Now, the thing is, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And in both paradigms, there are going to be questions asked, right? With the co-pilot paradigm, it's, is it true? Are we probably, I think what we're going to see is a normal distribution of the use of this technology. And there's going to be some super users. There's going to be some people that use it in an okay way and kind of sporadically, and then there's going to be people that just don't use it. And then with the LLM stuff, the agentic stuff, the kind of really vanguard or your human, your AI capital.
Yeah.
I think it's going to probably do so in very specific areas, not ubiquitously. So I think we still have a question about which direction the technology is going to go. We have a real question about the adoption, the nature of the adoption, the rate of the adoption, and the adoption curve generally.
Yeah.
And also, and this was, again, just to kind of close maybe on a kind of academic point, is I took a step back recently and I started to look at technology adoption of general purpose technologies.
Okay.
So steam, electricity, and there's always an overestimation at the start and underestimation in the long run.
Yeah.
And I think at the start, what happens is you've got this new technology, it's super shiny, it's extraordinary. And what happens is actually the investment goes into knowledge rather than production.
Yeah.
We start experimenting with these technologies.
Yeah.
We just do things, we learn things. There's intangible benefits to do with knowledge transfer, experimentation, sandboxes, so on and so forth. And then it kind of follows a J curve, And I think we're probably seeing the same thing with AI. In a way, I'm still astounded that the majority of companies are not on the cloud.
Yeah.
But the cloud market is still, the biggest companies in the world are, not driven by that kind of. So I think we are seeing tremendous innovation. We're seeing a huge impact in terms of labor, but it's still, we still got quite a bit to go with the journey.
Yeah. I mean, I was in Rome last end of October, beginning of November, and with family holiday, and we were talking about
not a papal visit,
not on this occasion, no. We were talking about the fact that in the kind of first century AD, the population of Rome was 1.5 million people, and you had. But most of that 1.5 million people didn't work. And the reason why is because when you say the population of Rome, it's actually Roman citizens was 1.5 million. There were an additional 3 million
serfs,
slaves, however you would define that. And so the people who were citizens didn't work. They didn't need to work. And so you had to provide those people with other distractions.
Yeah.
And you see the rise of the Colosseum and kind of that kind of level, give them wine.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do.
Bread
because,
and circuses.
Exactly. You need to manage people in a different way.
Yes.
And what I kind of, what I see, is if we go down the vanguard approach as you describe it, we're going to have to start thinking about this.
Of course.
And there's a certain attraction to going down that approach for people.
Yeah.
So do people want the co-pilot approach, or do they want the vanguard approach in life?
It is. I can imagine an executive saying, "Wouldn't it be great if I could just get rid of half of my cost, which is basically staff?"
Yeah. It's the biggest cost in most businesses.
Yeah, and you just think, my God. I mean, let's just, so there's the question, and I was kind of teasing at that, is it viable? Like I said, I think there'll be some aspects, maybe some use cases. Generally, is it going to be ubiquitous? Probably, I don't think so, but let's say even if that was the case, would it be desirable? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Raj, what is It's really interesting, isn't it? It almost goes back to some of the economic debates that we were having in the 17th, 18th century, and even the 19th century, when we were discussing about what happens if we get to this communist utopia.
Yeah.
Where, are we going to be liberated to have all this spare time to volunteer, to do creative things, to do this and to do that?
Yeah.
And the thing is, there is a question about, do you get there? Is it possible to ever get to that kind of utopian world?
Yeah.
But what probably most of the 20th century reflections on these kind of questions were, when you have an ideology that posits a kingdom of heaven on earth, it typically turns into some kind of terror. And I think a lot of the time what we might be seeing is, like you said, there is something, and everybody in the Bay San Francisco can forgive me for this, but there is something dystopian about being part of an ecosystem where you've got the most extraordinary concentration of wealth in human history, of innovation, of talent. And then you've got opioid crisis. And then you cross the bridge and you've got the most extreme ghettos and poverty and violence. And you're like, are we? How on our doorstep are we solving this problem?
It's funny. I mean, as you were talking there, I was thinking about the original Matrix movie, and the idea that the computer designed a system that was perfect. Utopia, the utopia, and it failed because people can't accept utopia. You need to have a certain level of dysfunction.
Well, I do think also fundamentally, and this is where I will absolutely push back against the bombastic claims about, let's say, the future of AI in terms of it. I just am a great believer in human creativity. Like that, I think we are way more than inferential entities. When we were talking about language and next token prediction, and I was like, a human being doesn't do language like that. We have intent. Like you intend to communicate, you're in communicating, you may have ends that you set, and so on and so forth. And I think what we're seeing now is automation of the means rather than end setting. Whereas a lot of this kind of speculative, science fiction-esque, or even kind of futuristic or utopian, dystopian thought is coming where we start to think, will the machines be able to set their own ends? And the thing is, I think we're far from that. And it's more to do with what kind of ends will we be setting for the machines, if you will.
And it's interesting because I have conversations here. One of the great joys of working for Wilson Sonsini is that I get to see real bleeding edge stuff that's going on, and I get to see how people are putting in, what people are designing, what people are building, what the edge cases look like, and the speed at which things are changing, and the speed at which we're moving towards certain what I would almost say is inevitabilities. But I think I get what you're saying, which is it's not inevitable. There is we are maybe over predicting what's possible, but actually in the long term we're under predicting.
Totally.
And so maybe what I'm doing is I'm saying we'll be there very quickly, but actually we won't be there very quickly, but we will get there. So we need to have these conversations.
Totally. And I think the irony is it's not deterministic, because the nature of those conversations will determine which way we go. So we've never successfully predicted the future. Like the Enlightenment was full of this kind of idea that there was this march, there was this kind of inevitability in terms of our understanding. It went first from the Newtonian, if you will, understanding of the world, and how we just got this extraordinary predictability. We'd be able to tell you when the next solar eclipse is in, 5,000 years and so on, and it would be accurate. To say, okay, we can just apply the same rules to our social world. And then we get this kind of mechanization of the way in which we order and understand society itself. And you see these kind of political ideologies that emerge as a result of that.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, we treat society as, we don't treat society like a living, breathing organism.
We treat it like a machine.
We treat it like a machine. And a machine you can control.
A
living, breathing organism, every single tiny conversation that takes place every single motion that takes place has a direct impact somewhere else.
Yeah.
That butterfly effect.
Yeah.
So you cannot predict what's going to happen. The same way as you can't predict what's going to happen inside your human body when you introduce something new as an external input into it.
Totally.
And I think that what we're seeing right now, for me, the biggest challenge right now is I really believe that the bit that's missing in all the conversations around AI, and I say all the conversations, as I'm saying, I'm going to just correct myself slightly, but I noticed that Anthropic did a video recently and they talked about their societal impact department.
They're all producing some kind of...
I know. but I think that this is why I'm really interested in where you are really and what you're looking at, because I get that you're looking at governance, but I also understand where you're coming from into that conversation. And that's a very, we talked about the tick boxes, we've talked about all those things, but I get that also what you're trying to do is you're trying to elevate the conversation beyond that.
Totally.
And I worry that we're not having those conversations out in the open enough right now.
No, I'm with you 100, absolutely. And I think part of the reason is because actually there's something particularly viral about saying the world's coming to an end, or we're going to get super intelligence, or it's the death of the body. We're going to transcend the body, transhumanism.
Yeah, right.
And I think it's...
I love being on the side of the hill. Thank you so much for that.
So I think part of it is also to do with, the appetite for that. It's not as salacious. But absolutely necessary.
Yeah. I'm really aware we're coming up to an hour.
Awesome.
And I posed the question to you earlier on, which I said we'll have at the end of the interview, and I posed it in the middle, but we didn't actually answer the question. So I'd like to ask you right now, what do you think it means to be human today?
What a question, Raj.
Well, I thought we'd end on something easy.
But do you know what? It is one thing I'm absolutely certain of is that the human is the human. And in 1,000 years' time or 2,000 years' time, the human being is going to be asking the exact same questions that you and I are asking at the core, which is we are self-realizing, self-actualizing, creative beings, and we're all burdened existentially with the problem of purpose and meaning. And that question is going to carry on forever and ever, when it's the same questions people were asking thousands of years ago, and it's the same questions people are going to be asking in thousands of years' time, which is, what is the point? And I think that fundamentally, that is what it means to be human, is to actually realize yourself in this world.
So what you're saying is, next week when I talk to all these students, I should tell them all to be philosophers.
Well, that's the last thing they should do. Thank you so much.
No, Emre, thank you so much.
I really appreciate it.
It's been
Fantastic,
really great.
Awesome. Real pleasure.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Just so you know, this podcast is for general information only. It's definitely not legal advice, and it doesn't create a lawyer-client relationship. Laws change, and they can be different where you live. So please don't rely on this when making decisions. If you need advice, speak to a lawyer. Every now and then, platforms might pop links or extra content alongside this podcast. They're not from me or Wilson Sonsini, and in some places, this episode counts as attorney advertising.